Ghost in the Shell SAC 2045 is a new Netflix anime that is a sequel to the original critically acclaimed standalone Complex series. It's another iteration of the famous and highly influential Ghost in the Shell franchise, and if you don't know what that is, I would recommend checking out my last video on Ghost in the Shell where I give a brief overview of what this series is. The return of standalone Complex as a TV show is something that's been hyped up for a lot of years. Rumors about this new series started circulating years ago, and a lot of people, including myself, got really hyped for it. However, all of our expectations were sort of dashed against the rocks as soon as we saw the first trailer. Before it even came out, this show got a ton of hate over its animation style. This is the first Ghost in the Shell anime that is animated completely in CGI, and it does not look great. I'm gonna give credit to where credit is due here. This is not the worst looking CGI anime ever. If you follow anime, you know that there are tons of worse looking CGI anime shows out there. And if we're pitting this against those, then this is actually pretty good. However, even with that being said, this is still far below the standards of the Ghost in the Shell franchise, which even at its lowest points is still known for having gorgeous animation. This, on the other hand, just looks okay. And unfortunately, okay is just not up to snuff with the standards of Ghost in the Shell. It's really inescapable that the animation of this show looks like a video game. Every episode just feels like a really long pre-rendered cutscene. Sometimes it felt like I was watching Team Fortress 2, other times it felt like I was watching Grand Theft Auto, but I never got away from the nagging feeling that this looks like a video game. Beyond base level aesthetics, the animation itself isn't very good either. All of the characters' movements are very weightless. Characters just seem to float around whenever they do things. There's no impact or weight to any of their movements. As a result, there are a handful of really good action scenes in this show that are rendered completely ineffective because of this terrible animation. On top of all the punches and kicks just lacking any power whatsoever, this kind of animation also leads to some really stupid moments. Like this part in episode 5 where a character does a series of backflips, which looks so ridiculous that it's already become a meme. I also found the facial animation to be extremely lacking. A lot of the times characters' faces will just be completely expressionless, and when they do try to express some sort of complex emotion, it just doesn't pan out very well. Speaking of faces, I really take issue with the character design in this show. There are several character designs here that have been significantly changed, I think, for the worse. For example, the main character, Motoko Kusanagi, looks 18 years old in this show, despite it being a sequel series. SAC 2045 takes place more than 10 years after the original standalone Complex show. But instead of getting older, the Major has actually become younger in appearance, and this is never explained. We're never told that, oh, actually she's inhabiting a younger body for some reason. It's not really addressed at all. This is made even worse by the fact that she has the same voice actress as the original series, so even though she looks really young, she sounds 35. But the biggest issue with this redesign of the character is that it just looks so stereotypically anime. What set Motoko Kusanagi and all of the characters in Ghost in the Shell apart from other anime is that they didn't look like anime characters. The character design was very grounded and real compared to other anime. Meanwhile, this redesign feels like every stereotypical moe anime girl that's come out in the past couple of years. Change her hair and eyes, and Motoko Kusanagi in the show could basically be replaced with any other anime girl. But Motoko isn't the only one that got changed for the worse. The character of Togusa also looks inexplicably younger. And this is even more unforgivable considering he's the only member of the cast who doesn't have a cybernetic body. So his body would naturally age after the events of the original series. But instead, not only does he look younger, but his hair is styled in a way that makes him look like he's part of a K-pop group. Even with all these complaints, I do have to say that the character designs do look better than the character designs did in Ghost in the Shell Arise. The character designs in that prequel just looked butt ugly. But even with that being taken into consideration, Ghost in the Shell Arise overall had much better animation. As a result, I would have to call SAC 2045 the worst looking Ghost in the Shell anime to date. But plenty of people have complained about the way this show looks. What about the story? Aside from aesthetic gripes, I was really excited to watch this show because some of the original crew from the standalone Complex series was returning to make this. So it had the potential to still be a really good story. And while I will admit there are definitely some interesting ideas in the story that could have made for something great, it's definitely not a great story. There are definitely interesting ideas here that could have laid the groundwork for a great Ghost in the Shell story. Things like post-humans, a new Japanese prime minister that is American-born, the idea of sustainable war, but nothing is really done with any of these ideas. None of them are actually weaved into the story in any meaningful way like the original series did. Most of these ideas just serve as window dressing to make the show appear more deep than it actually is. It doesn't actually have anything to say about any of these issues. It presents all of it as a cool spectacle rather than a thought-provoking conversation topic. As a result, this is the most philosophically barren adaptation of Ghost in the Shell, which is a shame because the philosophical depth of the series has always been one of its trademarks. But let's say you don't care about that aspect of the story. After all, even if this has no philosophy, it can still be an exciting and engaging story. But unfortunately, it's not. I was actually consistently bored watching this show. In fact, I was so bored by it that at a point, it became a struggle to continue watching each episode. The story is dull due to cliches and a notable lack of tension throughout, which is what I would say is the story's biggest problem. There are characters that are introduced every now and again in the show that are presented as huge threats. But then, after a few plot conveniences happen, they're just kind of thrown away like they're nothing. Section 9 never faces any real danger, and they're able to overcome most obstacles with relative ease. In the original standalone Complex series, the threats that were presented felt very real. Every conflict in that show threatened the characters in a significant way. Many times they were going up against obstacles that threatened their very existence as a team. Part of the reason I loved the second gig so much was because of the stakes of that season. When you finally get to the finale of the second gig, it feels like a whole lot is riding on the actions of the team. And that dramatic tension is what helped make the original series so engaging. But here, every threat that's presented is immediately undercut. It's hard to be engaged in a story where Section 9 has no struggles whatsoever. They just breeze through mission after mission, despite some of their enemies being overwhelmingly powerful to the point of absurdity. This is the kind of story that, if it was in a blockbuster movie, the internet would absolutely tear it apart because of its internal logical inconsistencies. Like I said, there's a lot of ridiculously overpowered characters in this show, and at certain points in the script, they just conveniently stop using their powers. So maybe it looks bad and it doesn't have any philosophy and the story isn't that great, but what about the character work in this series? Is that any good? Well, unfortunately, that's pretty barren as well. There aren't any really good character moments like in the previous adaptations of Ghost in the Shell. No new character information is revealed, and none of the characters really get any development. Any attachment that I felt towards the characters, I felt because I'm a fan of the franchise and I've grown attached to these characters over the course of years watching all of the adaptations of this manga. If it wasn't for the history I had with this franchise, I wouldn't be invested in these characters at all, because the writing of the show does not win your investment. There are even characters like Paz and Borma who are completely absent from the story. They don't even show up until 7 episodes in, and even after that, they never get a moment in the spotlight. This is incredibly different to the original series, which tried to treat each of its characters like an individual person, and fleshed each of them out so the audience really knew them. But this show doesn't try to do that at all. In fact, it doesn't even do that with its new characters. And yes, there are a handful of new characters in this adaptation that I don't think have been in any other Ghost in the Shell manga or anime. The first new character we're introduced to is called Standard, who, beyond his incredibly bland name, is also a bland character with no depth. He's so uninteresting and unimportant that he literally disappears halfway into the show. It's pretty clear that the writers weren't confident in him as a character and didn't really know what to do with him, so they just kind of got rid of him. I feel like if the writing was up to par with previous iterations, he could have been a really good character, but as it stands, he's pretty forgettable. Then we have a character that is basically just Agent Smith from The Matrix. And I don't just mean that in the way that he looks like Agent Smith from The Matrix, he is literally called Mr. Smith, and even has basically the exact same personality. I wouldn't mind this one as much as a little nod to The Matrix, only that he's kind of a major character. If he just had a cameo in 1 or 2 episodes, it would be fine, but he does get a lot of screen time, and they don't really do anything to make the character stand on its own besides being a ripoff of one character from The Matrix. But by far, the worst new addition to the cast is a character called Purine, or Purin, however you say her name. She's a pink-haired, stereotypical anime character, from her design all the way to her personality. In every way, she is an over-the-top anime character that you could pluck from pretty much any other anime show. And even in this adaptation of Ghost in the Shell, she does not fit the tone of the show at all. Her personality is so incongruent with everything else around her that she comes off as annoying and completely unnecessary. Considering that Ghost in the Shell has this legacy of being one of those anime you can show to people who think they don't like anime because the only anime they've ever seen is Dragon Ball and Naruto, having a character like this in the show feels extremely disrespectful to the franchise's legacy and identity. Ghost in the Shell has always been a franchise for mature audiences, and this character feels like it was plucked from a children's show. With all of this being said, I do want to say that I didn't hate everything about the show. Like I said before, there are some good fight scenes here that are well choreographed. But unfortunately, because of the aforementioned issues that I mentioned about the animation and the lack of tension in the plot, beyond being a pure spectacle, all those fights really aren't entertaining. I'll also say that the musical score is okay. I liked it enough, but it honestly would have been more effective if it was paired with better visuals. I also like the opening animation for the show. Unlike a lot of things in the show, it feels very traditionally Ghost in the Shell. But the downside to this is that the accompanying song for this opening animation does not fit the show at all. Money make the world go round. Money make this little show down. There are some fan edits that put the original Standalone Complex music to the animation, and it fits much better. I'll also say that the last 2 episodes of this season are the closest the show has gotten to replicating the feeling of the original Standalone Complex series, but even those episodes would be weaker ones in the lineup of the original show. It does end on an interesting cliffhanger which could lead to a deeper philosophical approach, but the writing in previous episodes suggests to me that nothing interesting will be done with the concepts that this ending brings up. The fact is for me that for every positive I have with the show, it has an accompanying negative that completely negates it. After the poorly received prequel series and the offensively bad American remake, I was ready for Ghost in the Shell to come back full force and remind people why it's one of the great sci-fi franchises. But instead, it's been watered down to appeal to a wider audience. At least that's the only conclusion that I can come to considering all the changes to the character designs, the new characters, and the utter lack of depth in the philosophy and story of this show. Honestly, this show does not resemble Ghost in the Shell at all, and I probably wouldn't have watched past a few episodes if it didn't bear the Ghost in the Shell name. I would call this the first truly terrible Ghost in the Shell anime. The Arise prequel definitely wasn't good, I didn't like it, a lot of other people didn't like it, but it still had merit and it still has its defenders. And I can respect people who like the prequel because as much as I don't like it, it does have some merit to its story. This, on the other hand, basically has no merits of its own. I never thought I would use Ghost in the Shell and Cash Grab in the same sentence, but honestly, this show kind of feels that way. In the end, I can't recommend SAC 2045 to anyone. If you're a big fan of Ghost in the Shell like I am, you're not going to find much to like in this show. Unless all you want from Ghost in the Shell is action and forgettable entertainment, then you're really not going to like this show. Before SAC 2045, I was hopeful that this franchise could bounce back to its former glory. But now I think perhaps it's time to retire this franchise as legacy media before we start beating a dead horse. As someone who holds the Ghost in the Shell franchise up as their favorite science fiction franchise, it's hard to say, but it is a truth that I have to confront. I would rather the franchise be laid to rest now than continue to be milked by terrible adaptations. Beyond that, I really don't have much else to say. As always, I'm Randall, and thank you for listening to me ramble.